Welcome to day 5 of Novel Challenge. My name is Brad Pauquette, and today we're going to talk about the universe of your story. So we're getting to the end of the first week, and this week we've really spent time discovering what a novel even really is. And we haven't yet got to the point of planning what your novel will look like, but we're examining some of the common structures and systems that are used for effective novel writing. And next week, we'll move into the planning phase. And then weeks 3 through 13 of the challenge, you'll actually do the writing. So altogether, that's 11 weeks of writing. You'll write for 6 days a week. So that's 66 days that you'll write. If you write for 1 hour a day, you'll write for 66 hours. And if you can achieve that rate of writing of 1,000 words per hour, then you should have plenty of time to complete a 50,000 word plus story in the course of that 11 weeks of writing. Now, 1,000 words an hour will take a little bit of practice. If you are new to writing, if you haven't been doing it much, you'll have to work yourself up to that speed. So take it easy. You have plenty of time to get there. However, it's not astronomically fast. There's nothing outrageous about this speed. I work with some clients that write upwards of 3,000 words per hour. So it's usually not great material when they write that fast. It requires a lot of editing. But I've found that 1,000 words per hour is manageable. Most people, even if you're not a professional writer, you can get yourself up to that speed, but it's also slow enough that you can still, be considerate in what you're writing and produce pretty good material on the first draft. So over that 11 weeks, you should have no problem mathematically completing a novel length work. And I'm excited to see you move into that. So at this stage, we reviewed the 3-act structure and the 5 conflicts and the 7 characters. And a common question that I get, and it's a fair question, is what if I don't want to do that? What if I want to write some other kind of story? And that's a good question. There are, of course, exceptions to every rule. All the things that I've talked about, we could pick out a few popular stories that have defied the rule in one way or another. However, by and large, the vast majority of successful stories do the things that I'm teaching you. And what I've found in my work as a developmental editor and as a writing teacher is that you either do this work at the beginning of your process or you do it at the end. So if you decide to buck these rules and do something else, eventually when you go to publish your work, whether you self-publish or you go through a traditional publishing process, you're going to need to work with a developmental editor if you want to put out the best possible product to the public. And so that developmental editor is going to bring into play a lot of the ideas, a lot of systems and structures that we're talking about right now, and they're going to help you conform your manuscript to the things that we've been discussing over the past few days. So you can either do it at the beginning of your process, you can plan for it, you can take it into account and have it in place, or you can write a complete draft and then do the hard work of implementing these things. And it's a lot more expensive and a lot less efficient to do it on the other side of your process than it is to do it right now. So my encouragement, just based on my experience in the industry and helping lots of people to produce their best work, many of their books have gone on to win awards and reach bestseller status and things of that nature. My experience dictates do your best to take this stuff into account right now. And if you're looking for the loopholes, you're looking for the nuance in the structure, really, I can't encourage you enough to check out the Novel Matrix book by myself, Brad Pauquette, or check out the classes on the company's website. There's a whole series of Novel Matrix classes, and we're giving you the brief version now just to keep the content constrained so that you have lots of time to work on your stuff and you're just getting the basic stuff that you need in order to be able to move forward. But there's a lot more to be said on these subjects. And so there are some ways to make the rules work in your favor. There are lots of ways and lots of examples of stories that have taken the structures that we've described so far and have implemented them in unexpected and unconventional ways. So if you're thinking, I hear you, Brad, but I want to do it differently, please take the time to explore the subject further. And there's a lot of ways that you can employ these principles in unconventional ways, but still achieve the important psychological effects that help people to connect to and relate to your story. So with that said, today we're going to talk about the last fundamental element of novel story structure, and that is the universe of your story. So the universe are all of the rules that govern what is normal and what is possible in your story. So you might be thinking, well, my story happens in the real world. However, between the pages of a book, there is no such thing as the real world. You have your own set of experiences that inform you on what the real world is. However, those experiences aren't shared by other people. Let me give you some obvious examples. Is it normal for a child to shout at his or her parents? Now, you probably know your answer right away. In my household, it's not normal for a kid to shout at your parents. If a kid shouts at me, then we're going to have a conversation about that. But other households work differently. And so if a child shouting at a parent is supposed to be a notable thing, like that's supposed to stand out, like, oh my gosh, something strange is happening here, something exceptional is happening in the story here, then that rule has to be established early on. And we could survey sort of Americans on the street and we come up with some kind of average position. Like, do most people think it's normal for a child to shout at their parents or not? And we come up with this average position. However, that really doesn't help you on a reader to reader basis. I always teach that you, as the writer, only bring half the material to the story. And the reader brings their own experiences and perspectives and prejudices to the story. And that's where the rest of the material comes from. An easy example is like a living room. If you're describing a scene in a book and you say that they're in a living room and that's all that you give me, well, I'm going to fill in what a living room looks like in my experience. And that might be different from what you are imagining as the author. And a lot of times, as far as a living room is concerned, it doesn't really matter because it's just a place for this story to take action. But nonetheless, anything that we leave out, we allow the reader to fill it in. And so, to continue this example, if a child yells at their parents, and this is supposed to be a big moment in the story, like we're supposed to notice that something peculiar is happening here, and something really important is happening. If you haven't educated me that that's an abnormal occurrence, then I might miss the significance of that if I live in a household in which children routinely yell at their parents. So it's up to you to make sure that you are bringing half the material to the table. And even though the reader will bring their own half, if we don't supply the fundamental rules of the universe and we don't educate the reader about what kind of setting this story takes place in, then we either force them to do more work than they should, and they could potentially lose interest in the story or find it unfulfilling, or they're just going to miss some of the important elements of the story, and likewise they could lose interest and find the story less fulfilling, less satisfying than it would be if they understood the rules. So consider a story like Downton Abbey. If you've never watched it, Downton Abbey is this BBC show. It's really a great show. I recommend it, but it's set in early 20th century England, and it's about this aristocratic family that has servants. And I've never been an aristocrat in 1917 England, nor have I ever been a servant in 1917 England. And a lot of what happens in the story culturally, I can't relate to it. I don't know what it's like to have like people that are higher than me in society that I'm not allowed to talk to. I don't know what it's like to have servants and there be like particular rules about how I can engage with the servants. I can't relate to that at all. However, because the show takes the time to educate me on what those rules that govern those relationships are, because I'm educated in that, now I can empathize with the characters' experiences. Because I can relate to what it feels like to be trapped. I can relate to what it feels like to be misunderstood or betrayed. And so when I understand the rules of the universe, even though I can't relate to the specifics of the relationships on a human level, I can still understand and appreciate what the characters are experiencing. And I can love the story, even though it's very different from my experience. So, just to give a few other examples of how our experience is subjective and we can't rely on this idea of the real world, let me ask you a few more questions. Is it normal for people to live together before they get married? In America, you're going to get vastly different answers on that. And unless you want your book to only appeal to people who have the same perspective on that question as you, then you need to educate them. And if you take the time to educate them, people who don't share your perspective will still be able to understand and relate to the story. How about this one? Is it normal for a single punch to knock someone out? We see lots of differences on this one in different stories, right? Some stories, a guy gets punched, he's out cold, like no question. Other stories, the characters just get beat and beat and beat and never get knocked out. So, what's the case in the universe of your story? If you don't educate me, then I don't know what's normal. So, like, think about a Bruce Lee movie. In a Bruce Lee movie, kung fu movie, Bruce Lee can knock out every bad guy in like one punch, right? Or one kick. He's just like, there's like 20 guys and he's just like goes around the room and knocks everybody out, no problem. And so the rule is established that one Bruce Lee punch takes care of business. But then we have the boss come out and Bruce Lee punches the boss and the guy just kind of like cocks his head and then laughs it off. And now we see that this new character has violated the established rule. And so we know that something exceptional is about to happen, that there's something different about this big bad guy, and it's a new challenge for Bruce Lee. But we can only understand and appreciate that because the rule of the universe has been established. One more example. Is it normal for people to go to church on Sunday? Same thing. We could come up with an average position among American readers or whatever your target demographic is. But if you want people to understand and appreciate your story, you need them to understand, is it exceptional that this character chose to go to church on Sunday? Or is it exceptional that a character would choose to stay home when the quote unquote normal thing in your story is for people to just go to church on Sunday morning? So it's up to you to define these elements. And this is one of the best adages of the, one of the best uses of the old adage, show, don't tell. It's much better for you to show the elements and the rules of the universe than it is for you just to tell us. Let me give you an example of that. So let's say that in the universe of your story, there is a rule that you do not talk to the queen unless she talks to you first. And if you violate this rule, you will be executed. We could have a narrator who just says that in the kingdom of gobbledygook, there is a rule that the queen may not be spoken to, and if she is, you'll be executed. The narrator can say something like that, and that will communicate the rules of the story. However, it's going to be a lot more impactful, and we're going to remember and understand the rule better if we see a character talk to the queen out of turn, and they're immediately, grabbed by the guards and dragged out into the courtyard and beheaded. And if we see that, it's just we're going to understand that there is a rule that we need to pay attention to here, and it's going to be much more profound and relatable for us. So there are a few categories of rules that we really need to pay attention to in every story. And I'm going to give you this list, but then beyond that, every genre will also have its own set of rules. So your story might have additional rules in addition to what we're going to talk about. And so if you're following along with the Novel Matrix book, this is chapter 3 that we're going to pull this from. So here are some common areas of the story that we need to define and make sure that we are well communicating the rules of the universe. The first is social norms. How do people normally interact with each other? Are they kind? Are they rude? Are they sarcastic? Are they courteous? Are they very reserved and suspicious of each other? What are the rules there? Consider like the show Friends. In the 90s sitcom Friends, everybody's sarcastic and rude to each other all the time. That's just the way that things are. And so when one character is sarcastic towards another character, we don't take it as any serious sign of disrespect or like they're not friends or anything like that. That's just the way things are in the universe of this story. We can contrast that with the Three Musketeers. And in the Three Musketeers, if even like a sideways look or an offhanded comment could land you in a fatal duel. So we have to see those rules in effect in order to understand how they play out in the story. Another category that we need to define the rules of are magic and the supernatural. This is a big one when it comes to quote unquote the real world, especially among Christian writers. When you think about the way that God intervenes and interacts with the world, what does that mean? What's your experience and expectations for that? Even among Christians, you're going to find vastly different opinions on what that looks like. So it's up to you to define that. If your story includes magic, not only do we need to know what's possible in the universe of the story, but we also need to know what's normal. There are some stories like Harry Potter where there are lots of people who use magic really frequently. And so there's just an expectation that if there's an opportunity to use magic, you'll use it. Whereas we have other stories that also include magic, like Freaky Friday, where there is one magical event that happens, and that is going to be a big deal. That's going to be a defining element of the story. It's going to dictate, the entire lives of the characters moving forward. Thirdly, third area that we need to define are physical actions and reactions. What happens when somebody gets punched? What happens if somebody falls from a high place? Do they die? Do they just walk it off? And it's a comedic element. Whatever it is, we need the rules to be consistent so that you can break those rules for a specific effect later on. Next, romance and love. How does that work in your story? Thematically, a lot of stories, especially like classic Disney movies, explore the idea of true love. So, in the universe of your story, is true love a thing? Is it the idea, that there's like one person that's right for everybody, and our goal is to find the one person? Is it a matter of compatible mates? And sometimes we establish that rule again so that we can break it. How about the kiss? What's the value of a kiss in your story? In classic Disney movies, again, the kiss is the kiss, right? If two characters kiss, this is tantamount to marriage. It's a done deal at that point. They have fallen in true love. In other stories, a kiss is just a kiss, and a character might even kiss more than one person. But we need to know the rules in advance. If the story hasn't established that the kiss is the kiss, well, depending on your reader's experience in the world and what seems normal and appropriate to them, they might miss the profound impact that you intended when, the kiss occurs. Next, we have to define serendipity. What are the rules around when, seemingly good things and seemingly bad things just happen? Is that because of just coincidence? It's determinism in the universe, and so stuff just happens. It's just statistical probability. Is it because of like fate or destiny? Is it because some people are lucky and unlucky? Is it because of God's influence in the world? Is there a greater spiritual battle that we are all engaged in, and that has influence in our lives? Again, your story has to define it. Technology is a big one, even in not stories that we wouldn't typically associate with sci-fi. Actually, in the genre of crime, technology is super important. Are we living in a world where people have cell phones and location tracking and things like that? Or are we living in like a 90s world where cell phones don't exist? That's an important technological distinction that is going to change the way your detectives interact with the story and pursue evidence. But even in a sci-fi story, just like magic, not only do we need to know what's possible, like what exists in this universe, but we also need to know what do regular people have access to. Like, is there really cool technology, but only this elite group of people has it? Or is there all kinds of cool technology and pretty much anybody can access it and use it? So it's up to us to define these elements of the universe. And that ensures that the big moments of our story, the things that are exceptional, really connect with our reader and they can understand how exceptional we intended those elements to be. We often overlook the value of the universe in developing your story thematically as well. The world is infinitely complex. Right now, I'm in the podcast studio at the company in Cambridge, Ohio. And even this is not a huge room or anything, but even in here, there are infinite details that I could observe. There's probably a few dozen different objects that I could talk about. But when I think about sights, smells, textures, tastes, things like that, there are infinite details in this room that I could include right now. And the details that I choose to develop about this setting really tell you a lot about my perspective as the author or the narrator of the story. And it could potentially also tell you a lot about the perspective of the characters that are involved in the story. So, in a similar fashion, the rules that you choose to develop and emphasize will also tell the reader a lot about your perspective. For instance, if you choose to develop rules about this spiritual battle that influences us in subtle and unsubtle ways, if you choose to develop those rules, that tells us something about you. If you choose to, you could tell the same story, but not develop any of those rules or influences, and you're going to share a completely different perspective. So don't underestimate the power that the universe has to shape
your reader's understanding of the story that you're telling. A good example of this is Mario Puzo. So Mario Puzo wrote The Godfather in the late 60s, I believe. And what's interesting is that he ripped off a Zane Grey novel called The Heritage of the Desert. In fact, so The Godfather came out, I think, in 1972. And a few years after that, there was this spaghetti Western based on The Heritage of the Desert by Zane Grey. And people were accusing Heritage of the Desert of having ripped off The Godfather and having copied the story of The Godfather and just set it in this Western. But Mario Puzo came clean and admitted that he had actually based his story on Heritage of the Desert, which was a book written by Zane Grey in the earlier part of the 19th century. And really, there's nothing unethical or abnormal about what Mario Puzo did. He's perfectly within his rights to borrow story elements and be inspired by Zane Grey's story and change it. But in Heritage of the Desert, it's about these Mormon ranchers, and there's some kind of kerfuffle, which leads to these families, these Mormon ranching families, being in this fatal feud. And so there's all kinds of vengeance killings, and they're just at each other until one of the ranching families kind of rises to the top, and this unexpected character becomes, rules the story at the end of it. And so Mario Puzo took a lot of those same story elements, and he changed the universe. Instead of setting it in the West, in the Old West with Mormon ranchers, he set it in New York City. And instead of ranchers as the main characters, he chose these mafia criminals. And same story, we have these crime families that become involved in this feud, and there's vengeance killings, and an unexpected character rises to rule the story. And so he used the same story structure, which again is perfectly reasonable and permissible as long as he's not copying direct ideas or copying word for word passages. It's perfectly reasonable for him to do that. But he took the same story structure, he changed the rules of the universe, and he had a new story in a new genre. That's the power of your universe. So at this point, we have talked about the 3x structure. We have talked about the 5 conflicts. We've talked about 7 characters. And now we've talked about the universe. And these are the essential ingredients of story. So you're now working with the building blocks. You know what a novel length story is, what the structures and systems are that we need to pay attention to. Next week, we'll move into the planning phase where we begin to put those to work for your story. Today, you have an assignment, and your assignment is to begin considering the elements of the universe. So you have those 3 story ideas that you've been noodling on over this week. And I want you to begin to brainstorm how the universe could affect that story. What's really fun is create 2 different rule sets for the same story and see how it changes the emphasis of the story, see how it changes the genre of the story even. But, these 3 ideas that you have, where and when is this story happening? Why is that particular setting important? What are the rules that govern what's normal in the universe of this story and what's exceptional? And finally, what's your real world and how will you show that value set to the reader? So begin to brainstorm those ideas, begin to ponder that. As always, there's more to be said on this. And universe, again, is often one of our overlooked elements. It's something we don't really think. It's like we all know we have to set this story somewhere, but we don't think about the universe as having power in developing our themes and some of the deeper content of our story. But it really does. So begin to consider that. As always, go deeper in the Novel Matrix book and the Novel Matrix classes. That's going to help. It's going to pay off as you begin to put these pieces into practice. And as time allows, watch a movie or consider a movie you've recently watched and think about how did the storytellers introduce the rules of the universe? How did they subtly educate you on what's normal, what's expected, and what's exceptional so that you could really understand and appreciate the exceptional elements of the story? So that's day 5. I'm looking forward to meeting with you again tomorrow, day 6, to close out week 1 of the 90-day novel challenge. Until then, have fun with this. You're still in this brainstorming stage. Nothing is committed to anything. Just play around with it. Let your mind go wild. And until I see you tomorrow, happy writing and be blessed.